So we're jumping back into Seder Makot. Again, this is a Amud Yomi Shir where we do a Amud a day, not including on Shabbats, and hopefully we'll be finished long before Rosh Hashanah, and be able to have a Siyam under our belt by Rosh Hashanah. And we're right now on Daf Bet Amud Bet or Beis Amud Beis, if you're of Ashkenazi persuasion. And we're at the two dots where it's so now there's some information that you need to know before we start on this daf, which is with this amud, which is why do people get sent to galut? What crime do people commit in order to get sent to galut? Now, we're going to learn in way greater detail why somebody gets sent to galut in the second parak of Makot, which is called the Elohen Golin. These people are sent to galus. So it's going to go in way more detail. But for now, just a remedial, surface level explanation as to why somebody goes to galut. It's really all you need to know for now, which is that if somebody kills somebody else due to neglectful behavior, meaning it's an accident, but due to neglect. If somebody kills somebody on purpose, they do not get sent to galut. And what does getting sent to galut means? It means that you get sent to an Ari Miklat, which is a city of refuge. So it's if somebody kills somebody on purpose, they don't get sent to galut. They don't have to go to an Ari Miklat. They have their own punishment for murder. And if you kill somebody purely by accident, then you don't get sent to galut either. But if you kill somebody due to negligence, an accidental negligence, then you get sent to galut. And that's what you need to know for now. There's going to be some other concepts that I have to fill you in on as we go. But hopefully I'll be able to catch that in time, and I'll tell you what you need to know as we go. But anyways, now we're going to look at the next part of our Mishnah. Again, Ma'adin anu b'ishpiloni shu chayv l'galus. So just to recap, our Mishnah brings a case where two people say, we testify that this person needs to go to galut. Why? We testify that this guy killed somebody because he neglectfully killed someone accidentally. And so the Mishnah says that we don't, and then if these two edim are found to be zomamin, we don't tell them that they have to go to galut instead. Rather, they get 40 lashes. And now the Gemara is going to talk about that. We know really. From where do we know this? How do we know that they don't get the punishment of a Ari Miklat? How do we know that they get 40 lashes? Amar Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish says, the Amar Kra, it says in the Torah, Hu Yano Salachan Ha'arim. The Torah says, in regards to Ari Miklat and Galut, it says that he will run away to the Ari Miklat. Hu velo zomin. It doesn't mention zomin when it talks about the Ari Miklat. It says that he, the guy who inadvertently killed, neglectfully, runs away to Ari Miklat. It doesn't say anything about zomin. So since zomin isn't mentioned at all within the Torah of Ari Miklat, you can't give a ed zomem the punishment of Ari Miklat. That's the Reish Lakish's answer. That's his reasoning. But in comes Rav Yochanan. And says Rav Yochanan Omer. Rav Yochanan says, Kal v'chomer. Another logical conclusion that he wants to make, much like yesterday. It's going to be pretty much the same thing, kind of the same thing as yesterday. Says Uma, hu she'aseh ma'aseh b'mezid. He's like, what? Somebody who killed somebody on purpose, who did an action on purpose, killed somebody on purpose, ain't no goler. A murderer who killed somebody on purpose doesn't go to galut. Hein shelo asu ma'aseh b'mezid. Then they didn't kill anybody on purpose. What did they do? They were false witnesses. Why do they? Eino din shelo yigalu? Doesn't it make sense that they shouldn't get punished? So a murderer doesn't get the punishment of galut. But these people, all they did was they were false witnesses. Why should they get punished more extremely than a murderer? That's Rabbi Yochanan's point. So that's why he says that because a murderer doesn't get it, then you can draw a logical extrapolation. You can extrapolate that they shouldn't get it either. Because if a murderer doesn't deserve it, then these people don't deserve it either. Because their crime is way smaller. The Gemara answers, Vehino tenet. But you're answering your own question. You're giving us the answer to your own. You're falsifying your own answer here. Who lo ligli, the person who kills somebody on purpose doesn't go to galut. Ki hachi de lo havele kapara, because galut isn't enough of a kapara. Now, in order to understand this part of the Gemara, there's a inyan in Judaism that you need to understand, which is that why do we have court systems that punish people? So the reason is it's not because we're seeking to punish or it's a deterrent, even though that is sometimes the effect, which is a desired effect. We want people to not commit sin, and sometimes having a punishment in place will stop somebody from sinning. But that's not the true reason. The reason is because when you get punished on this earth, it cleanses you of that sin. So after 120, you don't have to pay for that sin after. Meaning when you have to go downstairs, chas v'shalom, after 120. So we punish you here. If somebody kills somebody, then if they go to galut, then that's not enough of a cleansing. That's not enough of atonement, because they committed a horrible crime. It's like putting a Band-Aid on a flesh wound. It's not enough to fix the problem. You're putting a Band-Aid on a hole. It doesn't make sense. So what Rav Yochanan was saying is that this murderer, he doesn't get galut. So why do these people who did way less of a crime get galut? And the Gemara says, no, you're wrong. That logical conclusion doesn't make sense. Why? Because the reason why a murderer doesn't get galut is because galut isn't enough to cleanse him of his sin. It's not enough of an atonement. It's not enough of a kapara. But hein shelo asu ma'aseh b'mezid nami ligli. So except them, who their sin wasn't as great as a murderer. It says let them. So then it says let them suffer. Let them go to exile. Why? Their sin was way less. So you could potentially say that since their sin was way less, then galut is enough to cleanse them of their sin. Meaning, a murderer can't go to galut because galut isn't extreme enough of a punishment to cleanse him of his sin. But these people, as Rav Yochanan said, their crime is way less. So why not send them to galut? Because if it's a lesser crime, it requires a lesser punishment for kapara. So you could say that they should go to kapara. That they should go to galus. So then the Gemara concludes, it says, rather, it's clear by the Reish Lakish who quotes the pasuk. It says, it says that he runs away to the Ari Miklat. Him and not Zoim. And that's the explanation we use. Amar Ula, we're on to the next topic now. Ula says, Remez le'edim zomimin min Torah minayin. He says, where does it hint in the Torah for edim zomimin? Remez le'edim zomin. A hint for edim zomin, the Gemara asks, like, v'haktiv, it's clearly written, v'asitim lo kasher tamam. You don't need a hint. It straight up says that you should do to him what he tried to inflict. V'asitim lo kasher tamam. It clearly talks about edim zomin. So Ella, rather, Ula couldn't have asked such an obvious question. So what was Ula actually asking? Remez le'edim zomin shalokin min Torah minayin. So he says, how do we know that in these cases where you can't apply the exact punishment of like the Ben Grusha ben Chalutza or of the Gullus, where you can't apply the punishment they're trying to give, how do we know that these people get malkut, that they get lashes? Where do we see that hinted in the Torah? Dichtiv, so the Gemara answers, Vitztiku et tzaddik, you exonerate the innocent, Virshu et rasha, and you convict the rasha. V'haya im ben hakot rasha. And then it says that the rasha should be lashed. So the Torah says that if you prove that the innocent person is innocent, and that the guilty party is guilty, you should lash the guilty people. So then it says, but then the Gemara asks on these psukim, It says, the Gemara asks, Mishum v'tzdiku et tzaddik v'yeshu et rasha, because they proved that the guilty party is guilty, and because they exonerated the innocent party, v'ayayim begin hakot rasha, then the guilty party automatically gets lashes. Clearly, it doesn't make sense that just because the criminal system did its job and they proved that the guilty person is guilty and they proved that the innocent person is innocent, now all of a sudden they get lashes. That means that if that happens in any situation that the courts are doing their job, they're exonerating innocent people and saying that guilty people are guilty. So that means that everybody gets lashes. That doesn't make sense. So what does that? So what does that really mean? What is this coming to teach us? So Ella, rather, how should we really read it? Edim shirishu et tzaddik. There are witnesses who come and they make an innocent person look guilty. Va'atu edim achrine. But then more edim come. And they exonerate the tzaddik. So to give an example, Shimon and Levi come and say that Shmuel, he is a rasha for doing a crime. But then, so a tzaddik now looks like a rasha. But then two other edim come and say, Shimon and Levi, how could you have seen this crime happen when you were with us in a random place? At a different place, you couldn't have seen it. And by doing that, the tzaddik who was made to look like a rasha is exonerated and looks like a tzaddik, like the meikra, like he looked in the beginning, like in the first place. Vishavinu lahane rashaim, and the two edim zomamin now are seen as rashaim. So the tzaddik becomes a tzaddik because the edim zomin are proven wrong. Vehirshiu etarasha, and the two edim zomin are now convicted as rashaim. V'haya im ben hakot rasha. Then you should give malkot to the rasha, to the edim zomin, because in this specific situation. But then the Gemara asks, "V'tepikle me lotana." Why don't you just? There's a way simpler. There's a way simpler source for this. That's kind of convoluted to read into psukim in the Torah and to say that it's not clear in its base reading, so you have to fill it in. There's a way simpler. Source that you could use. You should use it from the Isur of Lotana, which is do not give false testimony. It's usher to, not every false witness is an Ed Zomem. It's only witnesses who get proven wrong specifically by placing them in somewhere else, by saying, how could you have seen that if you were with us? Through that specific way of proving them wrong, they become an Ed Zomem. But there's a completely different thing of don't testify falsely. So you could just say that the source for saying that an Ed Zomem can get lashes is just from the punishment, just from the Isur of Lotana. Don't testify falsely. And if you testify falsely, you can get lashes. Sorry. So there's a rule that it's going to be discussed more. It's not a fully accepted opinion. There is machloken on this, like most things in Judaism. But there's an idea that if you do a sin that doesn't have an action, then you cannot get malkut. You can't get lashes. There are other punishments that you're susceptible to, but lashes are only for sins that have an action. And dibur, talking, is not considered an action. So somebody who's Ed Zomem, who's a false witness, they only spoke. So since they only spoke, if you're a false witness, you're only speaking, then you can't get malkot, you can't get lashes. So the Gemara answers, why can't you do melotana? Why can't you learn it from Lotana? Because the have lav she'en bo maseh, because these two edim, they did a transgression which didn't involve an action. They only spoke. Bechol lav she'en bo maseh ein lokin alav. In any transgression that doesn't have a physical action, you can't give malkot for it. They can't get whipped. Okay. Now again, that's going to be discussed later. Mental note, remember that. Put a little asterisk there, because we're going to get back to it. Now, Tana Rabbanan, we're going on to the next thing. We learn in a Braita, Arba Dvarim Ne'emru Be'edim Zomin. There are 4 things that we learn when it comes to Edim Zomemin. What are they? 1. Ein Nasin Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. You cannot make somebody a Ben Grusha or Ben Chalutza, like it says in our Mishnah. 2. Ve'ein golin la'are mikla. And 2, you can't send an ed zomem to an are mikla, to a city of refuge, like it said in our Mishnah. 3, ve'ein mishalmin eta kofer. Now, what is the kofer? So if somebody owns an ox and the ox gores, it kills somebody, then the owner of the ox has to pay a fee called a kofer. Now, the Gemara is going to discuss in more detail the values of the kofer, and there's going to be a machloket there that we're going to find out more about. But that's what you need to know. If somebody's ox gores somebody and kills somebody, the owner of the ox has to pay a fee called the kofer. And then 4, ve'ein nimkrin be'eved ivri. They cannot be sold as a Hebrew slave. Now, how do you get sold as a Hebrew slave? Do a court system? Like, what can you accuse somebody of that they get to be a Hebrew slave? It's this situation. Let's say that I accuse Shimon and Levi of stealing $100,000, and they end up the case goes through, and he ends up being convicted, and he has to pay the fees and fines worth for $100,000. Now, if Levi has enough money to pay what he stole, pay back what he stole, plus the fees for stealing, then everything's fine and dandy. He just pays the fee and leaves. But let's say a thief doesn't have enough money to pay back all the things that he needs to pay back. So what happens? So this person gets sold as a slave until he pays back what he owes. So he's sold as an Eved Ivri. So if somebody cannot pay a fine to the courts, then they have to become a slave until they can repay the fine. So what the list is saying now is that Ed Zomem cannot be sold as an Eved Ivri. An Ed Zomem can't be sold as a Hebrew slave. As a Jewish slave. Mashum Rabbi Akiva Amru, and Rabbi Akiva comes and he adds a 5th one. Af ein mishalmin al pi atzman. That an Ed Zomem, if he confesses that he's an Ed Zomem, he does not have to pay. Meaning, if he says, I'm an Ed Zomem, I was somewhere else on that day, I couldn't have seen it, then since he confessed, he doesn't pay. That's the 5th one that Rabbi Akiva adds on. And now the Gemara is going to go and he's going to break down all 5 of these things and discuss them. Einasin ben Grusha ben Chalutza kedamrina. So now it says on the first one, we don't make somebody have the status of a child of divorcee or child of somebody who did chalitza. Kedamrina. We talked about it already. We're not going to go through it again. Ve'ein golin la'are miklat kedamrina. And we don't send them to an Are Miklat. We talked about it already. If you want to see that again, rewind the video. But if you want to hear that again. But you don't send an Edzomem to a city of refuge, like we already said. Ve'ein meshalmin et kofer. Now we're getting to something we haven't talked about yet. That you don't pay for that you can't get an Edzomem to pay for a kofer. Why? Why do they not pay for the kofer fee? Kisavre kufra kapara. Because they hold that the kufra payment is a kapara, and vehani lav b'nei kapara ninhu, and these witnesses, they don't need this type of kapara. Meaning you're giving them the medicine for the wrong sickness. They didn't own an ox that gored somebody, so they don't need that kapara. So they can't pay that fee because they don't need this type of medicine. They don't need that type of kapara. Ma'atana kufra kapara. So now, if you're saying kisavre, that they hold that kufra kapara, the person who wrote this list holds that kufra is kapara, that means that these people hold it, but other people hold something else. So the question is asked, who are these people? Who holds this way? So the Gemara says, Ma'antana kufra kapara. Who holds that kufra is a payment for atonement, for kapara? And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says that Rabbi Yishmael Benoshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Barokahi. That it's Rabbi Yishmael, the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. Ditanya, because it is taught in a Braita. Venatan pidyon nafsho. In the Torah, when it talks about the kafir kapara, it says that he should give a ransom for his life, nafsho, for his soul, for his life. Demei nazik. So the Tanakama says that you should pay the value of the victim. But Rabbi Yishmael Benoshel Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka Omer Demei mazik, that you should give the value of the owner. So the Gemara asks, my love v'hakamiflihi. Now, is it not that they're debating this point? Because let's think about this for a second. If you're saying that a kufra is a monetary payment, then you should pay for what you damaged. You should pay for the victim, the value of the victim. You damaged the victim. You have to pay back what you damaged. You have to pay the fee for damaging an item. But if you're holding that kufra is a kapara, it's an atonement, then I should pay my value as the owner because I'm atoning for my life. So therefore, I'm being atoned for my life. I have to pay my value. It's atonement for my value. So the kufra should be my value. So the Gemara says, isn't that not isn't this not what this disagreement truly is about? Demar Savra Kufra Mamona, that the Tanakama holds that the Kufra is a monetary payment, it's for compensation for damages. Umar Savra Kufra Kapara. While one master, which is Rabbi Yishmael, holds that it's a kapara, it's an atonement. Therefore, you should pay his own value. Amar Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, no. This is not what they're arguing about. You're wrong. Duchuli alma kufra kapara. Everybody holds that kufra is a kapara. V'hacha b'haka miflihi. And what they're arguing about is Mar Savar de Mazik Sheminan, is that one person holds that what level of kapara do you need? The Tanakama holds that I need the kapara based on what I damaged. If I damaged somebody's $50 worth of damages, so to speak, then I need an atonement level worth of $50 because I did the damage of $50. I say but Chas v'shalom, hopefully I don't have to give any kufras. That wouldn't be fun. I don't own any oxes, so I should be safe from owing kufra. But whatever. But the Tanakama holds that the amount of kapara that you need is the value of the victim. Umar Savar bidemazik shayaminan, and Rabbi Yishmael ben Osher Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka says, long name, I'm just going to call him Rabbi Yishmael from now on, holds that what value of kapara do I need? I need my own value of kapara. I don't need the value of what I damaged. I'm the one who did the wrong. I'm the one who owned the ox, so I need kapara at my value. So it's not the purpose of the payment that they're arguing about according to Rav Papa. It's the amount of the payment that they're arguing about. But Rav Papa says that everybody holds that the kufra is the kapara. Don't get it twisted. It's not. Don't get confused. Everybody holds that the kufra is the kapara. It's just the value that they're arguing about. So the Gemara says, "Ma'ay tamehu derabanan." What is the reason that the Rabbanan hold that you owe the value of the victim? Ne'amar hashta. They're using a gzer shava because it says the word hashta in one pasuk in regards to the kapara payment, and then it says hashta lamala, and then it says hashta in the pasuk prior. Now, what does it say? What's a gzer shava? Okay, if there's two psukim that are about roughly the same topic, if I'm not mistaken. And they have, in these two psukim, have a word that's the same. You could infer from one pasuk to the other. So what the Gemara is saying is that in one pasuk where it says the word hashta, it's talking about a case where an ox gores a woman who's pregnant and the fetus dies. So in that case, it's explicitly written in the Torah that that you pay the value of the fetus. So it says that you pay the value of the victim. The fetus is the victim. You pay the value of the victim. So just because, so you pay the value of the victim in that case, and then it talks about the ox goring in another thing, and he uses the exact same word of hashta. So again, if you're in a case, it uses the word hashta to regards to when somebody stabs a woman who's pregnant and the woman loses the fetus, you pay the value of the fetus. And then the same word is used to talk about the kufra. So therefore, you can also make the law, you can use a gzer shava to say that you should pay the value of the victim as well. Because it uses the same word. Has hashta lamala và hashta lamata. So that's why. They both have the same word, so you could draw conclusions based off of those two psukim together. So they're using, it's called a gzera shava. Tov. Just as it says in one pasuk that you should pay the value of the victim, i.e. the fetus, afkan bidnizak. So here too, you should pay the value of the victim when it comes to the kafra. That's the Rabbanan's reasoning. But then the Gemara asks, Rabbi Shmuel, what's Rabbi Shmuel's answer then? They have an answer as to why you should pay the value of the victim. They use Gzer Shava. What's Rabbi Shmuel's proof? So Rabbi Shmuel says, V'natan pidyon nafsho ktiv. It's written in the Torah that you should give the value, a ransom for your life. So it should be for your life. So it should be for your life's worth, is what Rabbi Yochanan says. V'Rabbanan says, the Gemara says, that's a very compelling reasoning. It says pidyon nafsho. So why shouldn't it be the value of the owner? Because it says that you should pay the value, that the owner should pay ransom for his life. So the ransom should be the value of his life. Rabbanan answered this question. Why don't you hold that way? So then the Rabbanan says, Ein pidyon nafsho ktiv. True. It's written that it's pidyon nafsho. Yeah, you're right. Mihu ki shaminan b'denazik shaminan. However, the value of the kufra is irrelevant. But what's the value that you have to pay? It's the value of the victim. Meaning that yes, you have to pay the value of the owner's. The owner has to give a ransom for his soul. Meaning he has to do kapara. The rabbis are saying that we agree with that sentiment. It's for kapara, Rabbanan, right? But just because it's for the owner's kapara doesn't necessarily mean that it's for the owner's value. That's a logical conclusion that Ravi Shmuel is drawing, but we don't have to draw that. That doesn't disprove us. That's just something that he's concluding, but we don't have to conclude that. We could say yes, that the owner has to have kapara. What's the value of the kapara? The value of the victim, and that's the end of this discussion. Now, it goes on to the next item on the list. Item number 4. Ve'ein nimkarin be'evid ivri. And just a refresher, somebody who's sold as an Eved Ivri, it's because they can't afford to pay the fines associated with the crime. They can't afford to pay the fees and fines for the crime they committed. So it says, Ein nimkarin be'evid ivri. They are not sold as a Hebrew slave. Savar Rav Hamnuna Lameimar. Rav Hamnuna said, Hani mili heicha de'et leila deida. This is so only when the accused person has enough money to pay for it. But demigu deihu lo nizdavnin, because since the accused wouldn't have become a slave because he could afford to pay for it, therefore the edim zomemin shouldn't become a slave either, because what they were trying to inflict was a payment. It wasn't for him to become slavery. That's not the punishment that the accused would have gotten. Inhu nami lo mizdavnu. So they too are not sold because they wouldn't have gotten the accused sold. Aval heicha deleit leila. However, if the accused person didn't have enough money to pay, therefore the punishment would have in fact been slavery for him because he couldn't have afforded the fees. Afal gav the itlehu didehu mizdavnu. Even if the edim zomamin could afford the fees that they were trying to inflict on the accused, they still become slaves. So what does this mean? What Rav Hamnuna is coming to say is, okay, Shimon and Levi accuse Zvulun of stealing $100,000. Okay, if Zvulun could have afforded to pay back the $100,000, then he wouldn't have become a slave. So even if the edim are found to be edim zomemin, since the punishment they were trying to inflict was a payment, because Zvulun could have afforded it, then the edim zomemin cannot be sold as slaves, because that's not what they were trying to inflict. But, right, Rav Hamnuna, if Zvulun couldn't have afforded it, and he was going to become a slave, but then these two edim were found to be edim zomemin, then even if, according to Rav Hamnuna, even if the edim zomemin could afford the fee they were trying to give to Zvulun, they become slaves. Why? Because Zvulun would have been able to afford it. So what punishment were they trying to give Zvulun? They were trying to give Zvulun the punishment of slavery, because Zvulun couldn't afford it. So even if the edim could afford it, it's irrelevant, because that's not what they were trying to give. They were trying to give the punishment of slavery to Zvulun. So that's Rav Hamnuna. But then the Gemara knocks it back. The lemrulay. But then the two witnesses, if you were to tell the witnesses, okay, I know you could afford the fee you were trying to give Zvulun, but Zvulun couldn't have afforded it. So Zvulun was because Zvulun was going to become a slave, so too you will become a slave as well. So then the slaves would say, hey, but if Zvulun would have, but they would have said, if he would have had the money, then he wouldn't have been sold. So we too can't be sold, meaning the punishment we were trying to convict is a conditional one. Meaning there's a condition involved to what we were trying to give him, which is that if he could afford it, he pays. If he can't afford it, he doesn't pay. So therefore, since it's conditional, therefore we should also get that condition. So then the Gemara rephrases Rav Hamnuna's position. So the Gemara says, Ela savar Rav Hamnuna l'meimar. So Rav Hamnuna comes to say, Hani mile, heicha de'esa lehei, ole dedehu, if both parties, the edim zomemin and the accused, both do not have the money, mizdavne, they're sold. Meaning, if Zvulun would have been sold as a slave, and then these two edim were found to be edim zomemin, and they too couldn't afford it, So then they would have. So then they have nothing to say. He would have been a slave because he couldn't afford it, and they can't afford it, so they can't say, "Hey, we can afford it. We shouldn't be a slave." So therefore, in that situation, they get sold. Amar le Rava. Rava rejects this. Rava says, "V'nimkar b'gnevato Amar Rachmana." The Torah says that you're sold due to his theft. B'gnevato v'lo zamamo. It says that you're sold if you steal and can't afford to pay. It doesn't say anything about edim zomim there. It says b'gnevato, not b'zamamo. So regardless of any situation, if either party could afford it, not afford it, doesn't matter. An ed zomem cannot be sold as a slave, as a Hebrew slave. Now, this is not exactly the end of the daf. There's a little more. But it's a good place to end because it's the end of the sugya, and this is a little bit of a longer shiur that we did today. I'm trying to keep it to 20 minutes. I'm sorry I took too long. I'm still trying to figure out how this is going. But I'm going to try and keep it at 20 minutes a pop. But yeah, that's the end of this sugya, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow.